It was Craig in Yorkshire who left that very interesting voice message about electric vehicles, and that is going to be our subject when we come back just after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Just before the break, and I'm now delighted to welcome into the conversation Ross Clark, who's an investigative journalist and author of Not Zero, and Scott Dixon, a motoring disputes expert. Welcome to my show, gentlemen. Let's bring in Scott Dixon, motoring disputes expert. Scott, my understanding of electric vehicles, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that insurance on them can be incredibly hefty, because if something goes wrong with the battery, well, costs you an arm and a leg. But also, if a car that has a big, 2-ton battery and it happens to hit you, that could probably also cost you an arm and a leg, if not your life. Is there evidence here that electric vehicles are sort of churning up our roads? And do they cost the average punter a lot more if they wanted to buy one and insure it?
They do, and the problem motorists have is not just the cost of buying the cars, but also insuring them. And if you have a collision, a lot of these cars are just written off because of the damage done to the batteries. And interestingly, Stellantis are going to import Chinese cars, as Ross mentioned, and that's to meet the targets. But that's going to undermine our own UK car manufacturers. So China isn't affected by the regulations that the UK car manufacturers are. And all we're doing is offshoring our own emissions to China and boosting their economy to the detriment of our own.
Right, I mean, that's a very important point. Hi, Scott. We were speaking to Ross before the break, and I was saying that I wanted to know what on earth went on in that car park at Luton Airport. Was it just one vehicle that blew up? What does this mean for electric vehicles? Are they actually more dangerous if something goes funny with your car battery when you've got an electric car? Is this going to create a blazing inferno in your residential area?
It's difficult to say, isn't it? I mean, we're in uncharted territory, and the fact is the demand for EVs isn't there for a multitude of reasons. And people, least of all, they can't afford to run them. And you mentioned charging points earlier on. There's 20% VAT on public charging points. And the government could incentivise motorists to move to EVs by reducing that to 5% in line with the domestic charging, for your electric bills at home.
Yeah, I mean, are charging points paid for? Because I don't own an electric vehicle. I don't know how these work. I assume that a bit like when you go put petrol in your car at a petrol station, you pay something at some point to get that. And yet sometimes when I'm walking around West London, you've got people just connected to lampposts, and they don't appear to have any sort of system or, hole in the wall, or tap your card on the side of this particular lamppost. What's going on there?
Well, the ones that you'll find on the street are run by the local authorities, whereby the ones at motorway stations will be privately operated.
Right.
And the cost on the motorway stations is quite expensive now, because in line, the demand is starting to increase, so the private operators are jumping on that. And the cost of charging up a car at a motorway station is probably more expensive than it is to fill a car up with petrol and diesel.
Wow. Also, sometimes they run out, don't they? There's not enough sort of power to be able to charge all the cars that come to use them, I think I read at one point.
Well, that's another problem as well. We don't have the infrastructure in place as it is. And do you think it's going to improve in the next few years when the UK government want 80% of all cars sold by 2030 to be electric?
Yeah, it's mad.
We're not going to have the infrastructure to support that.
Absolutely impossible. But do we know the answer to whether or not when people are plugged into the street light, if they're paying for that or not? Because that's what I want to know, because I actually don't have the answer to that at all. Does anyone know that?
Initially, it was free. And
so we were paying for it?
We were. Local authorities in Scotland, for example, they were initially giving it away for free, but they're not now.
Oh, good. I'm glad, because frankly, the only people who can afford electric vehicles don't need subsidy from the rest of us. Ross, when it comes to the whole point of this and this ridiculous 80% target of the sale of electric vehicles by 2030, put that in your pipe and smoke it soon, like that ain't going to happen. This, in theory, is the drive towards net zero in terms of emissions. But how much of this actually does lead us down the road to net zero? Because in order to get electricity, you have to generate energy, and some of that energy is going to be coming from non-renewable sources. And in order to make these cars, and especially the batteries, which take a huge amount, I think someone said to me once it takes about 75 years of using an electric vehicle before you actually sort of cover the output of the CO2 emitted in order to make the thing. And if they only last about 20 years, this just seems to me to be a hiding to nowhere. To me, 15 to 20,000 miles before you break even. I think I've had my car since about 2017. No, 2019. There you go. So 5 years. And I used to drive from Brussels when I lived there back to the UK and back. And I think I've probably only just got to about 15,000 myself, if that. Ross, Scott, thank you ever so much. Before I let you guys go, I want a one-word answer from both of you. If you have a combustion engine car, should you hold on to it because its value might go up in the used car market? What do you reckon, Ross?
Well, I would hold on to it, not just because its value might go up, but also because it's probably the best way to keep your emissions lower is running a car for as long as possible and not sort of incurring those manufacturing emissions that you do.
Good point. Well made. Scott, if you've got a petrol-powered car, should you be holding on to it? Might that thing be worth more money?
Yes, I agree with Ross, Alex. And to give you an example, I've got a 2008 Nissan Micra. It's a 25th anniversary model, 49,000 miles on the clock. I'm its second owner. It's coming up 16-year-old in September. And why would I want to get rid of a perfectly good, small, economical car that still has plenty of life in it to scrap it for an EV? Doesn't make any sense, does it?
Sounds like me. Small, economical, with plenty of life left in it. Scott, Ross, thank you ever so much. Yeah, 60.